Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Wednesday's Insight and APSAD webinar. So my name is James, one of the educators here with Insight, and I'm coming to you from Miagin, also known as Brisbane, the lands of the Turrbal and the Yugara peoples. And today we're actually doing this kind of live also in our office here in Brisbane, and introducing our speakers in a few moments' time. Before I go any further, though, I'd like to begin by recognizing and acknowledging and honouring the traditional custodians of the land. So as I mentioned, we're here in Miagin, and I also extend that recognition to the lands and the waterways upon which everybody's joining us from Queensland and probably wider across Australia today. And we want to pay our respects to our elders who have passed on, and also really recognise and honour those who are still leading today and pay our respects. So yeah, wonderful to have people joining us online and also in the room today, because we are going to be speaking very much on a topic, and our presenters are going to be speaking on a topic that really connects and relates to a powerful force that is helping us shape alcohol and other drug sector and work in ways that really, I guess, emphasize the need for compassion and empathy and understanding. We have now an increasing number of peer workers here in Queensland. Probably in other areas, this is already something that is common for you, but it's certainly something here that has been building over the last couple of years. And it's a privilege to walk alongside and have them walk alongside us in our work for that transformative power of empathy that they bring. So today I get the wonderful opportunity not only to recognize lived and living experience of people experiencing problematic substance use, who've experienced also the treatment systems which are wrapped around that, and the other types of issues and co-occurring issues that occur as a result of it, but to also recognize, as we see there on the screen, the significant stigma and structural barriers that have often been created. And this particular webinar today is talking about a piece of work that our lived experience educators, Brett Hodges and Julia Ward, who will be coming to speak to us today, have commenced to really help to, I guess, help the integration of this amazing workforce into the types of things that we do. So probably without any further ado, I'll invite them up to commence our session today. But just a few matters of housekeeping. So we have chat available on our webinar today. So if there are any questions or comments or anything that you'd like to put to our presenters, feel free to pop that into that chat. Just to let you know that that chat comes direct to the hosts and panelists. It's not seen by all. So just feel assured, though, that if you pop something in, that it is going to come. We hope towards the end of this to spend the last sort of 10 minutes or so presenting any of those questions or comments to Brett and Julia for their response. We'll try and get through as many of those as possible. So I think that's all I need to say, other than to have the privilege of introducing the first of my colleagues here, Brett Hodges. Many of you may already know him, who will kick us off this morning. Thank you, Brett.
Thanks, James. It really is an honour for us to stand up here as a lived experience alcohol and other drug educator. This idea that we even get the space to do this and talk to an audience like we've got here today is significant. That there were so many before us that weren't presented this opportunity. And so I think part of what we do is recognising that there's many come before us that have been through a tougher path, where our path here at Insight's been relatively smooth. I really wanted to I know James has acknowledged that insight sits in a certain space, and we do incorporate a lot of First Nations understandings into what we do. But I just want to talk about the artwork here, and particularly today for this project. I think the symbolism that comes through in this artwork, and it was one that was commissioned by Insight to represent the work that we do, and it symbolises the idea that all these different spaces we work in around the state is we bring that knowledge back to this idea of a meeting place, and we share that. And more than anything in this project, this has been a real collaboration. And I look at this artwork and I think of collaboration, this idea that it's not about being an expert, it's all about the idea that we all bring our own understandings. And if we can spend more time thinking about how contextually they can be appropriate to others and bring them back. And so a lot of the work we do, particularly in this model, has been about sourcing information from around Queensland, from all those in designated roles, to try and come up with an idea to tackle what we're here today, which is around boundaries. We put some construction stuff on this slide, particularly because for us, all the work that we've done here over the last 3 years really feels like scaffolding. And I'll just talk a little bit about some of the stuff that we've done. I'm not going to go into it too much, and many of you already have seen it or completed these. But part of the work we've done here is looking at different audiences and looking about this lived experience, or this AOD peer workforce, and how we're going to best prepare for it. And so we put together an e-learning around this idea of AOD living experience, the workforce. It's really targeted at those that don't understand what's going on and maybe want to have a better understanding of what sort of positions are available and what this workforce means. We also developed an organisational readiness toolkit, which really focuses on those organisations looking to integrate a lived experience workforce into their workplace, and how you can do some of that preparatory stuff. In both of those resources, we were so blessed that there was, from around the world, from interstate, many examples, some really great examples of where peer workers are making great changes. And so for us to fill those modules with good examples and practical ways that you might be able to integrate that wasn't a step too far, because the evidence was there. And so it was really about us collating a lot of that and having those conversations and trying to just broadcast some of that news. We also then stepped into this idea of what do peer workers need? And we spent a lot of time talking with peer workers and looking at literature around what are the needs of this AOD peer workforce moving forward. And there was some common themes that came up, one around disclosure, one around self-care, and one around boundaries. Now, we took the low-hanging fruit. Sharing your story and disclosure is something that doesn't sit only with a peer workforce. Mind you, a peer workforce is required to do it far more often than other professions. But we knew we could draw from some of that stuff that had been peer-reviewed and had been out there, and people had thought processes and ways around doing disclosure safely. So whilst it was a bit of a stretch to get that into a peer work framework, there was a bit of stuff that we could build on. When we went into looking after yourself or self-care, this subject's been widely written about. And I think many of the strategies and ideas that we use to look after ourselves is very similar to what we're doing in peer work. So here was this idea that we had all these things that were sort of, there was information out there, and we could grasp a bit of it and pull it together and make it relevant. But that third one I mentioned was boundaries, and today we're going to talk about boundaries and our process over, Julia and I's process over the last 8 months, as to how we've done that. And we really did feel like this was all scaffolding leading up to boundaries. It's one of the more challenging ones. There is nothing written about it. There is very few examples that can be taken from other workforces and implemented in a peer workforce sense in regards to boundaries. We know the nature of the relationship peers have with other peers suggests we need to work on boundaries. I'm going to go and cough a bit, but I'm going to introduce my mate Julia here, and she's going to have a talk to you about some of the other stuff that we went through.
Thanks, Brett. I hope you can see me. I'm a bit shorter than Brett. Yeah, all good. And unlike Brett, I really have to rely on notes. Brett's done this stuff before. I haven't. I'm just going to move the mouse over there and put my notes there. So we knew what we wanted to achieve. That is a learning module that was equally designed by lived living experience workers for lived living experience workers. But there was no clear path to doing so because as far as we were aware, no one had ever done this before. And believe me, we looked, we couldn't find anything. We already knew, like Brett said, that boundaries was an area in peer work that needed attention. We'd had all the informal chats with lived living experience people in the AOD sector, alongside our own experiences with lived living expertise. And we also knew that this module needed to be developed from a co-design approach. However, what does it really mean to co-design with people who have that lived living experience? Because if you've been in this space for a while, you'll know that co-design gets thrown around quite a lot and it's become a bit of a buzzword. When you scratch the surface, you often find that the process isn't quite as collaborative or inclusive as it sometimes claims to be. We knew this project was different. It wasn't about ticking any boxes. It was about building something together from the ground up with people who live and breathe peer work every day. And that's what I want to emphasize here. How we created an e-learning module on boundaries in peer work, not by just consulting people with lived living experience, but by co-creating it with them as equals from the very beginning. And there was no roadmap to guide us with this. So let's talk about how co-design usually plays out. In many projects, the research team or organisation has already decided what the problem or the issue is. They have already defined the problem or opportunity. They have identified the stakeholders and participants. They have the goals, the scope, and the timelines. They have built the team and they have already constructed an outcome. Then, once all of that is locked in, they bring in people with lived living experience. And we're asked to give feedback or to validate what's already been decided. This happened to me in my previous role. I remember being asked to give my thoughts and responses to a project that was well underway. It was certainly an eye-opener for me as I became aware that my responses were becoming nothing more than a box-ticking exercise. It was because of that experience that I came to understand how vital it is for lived living experience voices to be heard, not after a project has already started, but all the way through. I'm not saying that that's always done with bad intentions, but the result is that our voices are very limited. We're responding to projects we didn't help build. If we're being asked to co-design, but have no influence over the outcome, then our input is symbolic, not meaningful. And we know that decisions were made long before we were consulted. So by disrupting conventional systemic approaches, we believe this authentic partnership of lived living experience engagement shifted the status quo of contemporary co-design practice. Now, our consultations, or more aptly, our conversations, were with 25 peer participants. And the following graphs that you're about to see on the screen represent the fact that the Boundaries module is a purely peer-driven, designed and produced resource informed by peer workers for peer workers. From the very beginning, we brought together a remarkable group of individuals, all in designated lived living experience roles, who represented a very diverse cross-section of Queensland, with some outstanding contributors joining us from interstate. This group includes voices from both government and non-government sectors, spanning frontline support roles, as well as management and coordinator positions. What makes this group so powerful is not just their professional expertise, but the authenticity and insight they bring from lived experience. Their perspectives have been essential, not as an afterthought, but as co-creators. We engaged them before development even began. They were part of the initial conversations, the design process, and every review that followed. This was not tokenistic inclusion, it was genuine partnership. Their input shaped our priorities, challenged our assumptions, and ensured that what we built was grounded in real-world relevance. Whether it was refining language or identifying gaps in support, their contributions have been invaluable. So as we move forward, we continue to honour this collaborative spirit, because when lived experience leads, systems become more humane, more effective, and more responsive. So fortunately, this Boundaries module started in a very different way. And as I've already mentioned, Brett and I were already having those conversations with peers in the AOD sector. These were informal chats, sometimes face-to-face, other times via Teams. And instead of questioning and interviewing our peers, we used themes such as co-creating a module that speaks to the realities of boundaries in peer work. We began conversations, not with a question, but more so with an invitation. Let's talk about the reality of boundaries in peer work. And as expected, this theme sparked many conversations about boundaries. The real, messy, lived experience of navigating them in peer work. The blurred lines, the emotional labour, the pressure to be everything to everyone. We all knew this was something that needed attention, because it soon became evident that no one in the sector was talking about boundaries. There was an assumption that people in living experience roles instinctively knew what their boundaries should be. And because there was no formal structure, no surveys, no focus groups with clipboards, we just talked, we listened, we shared. And over time, the shared vision began to materialise and other themes emerged. The benefits of boundary training and starting out as a peer worker. So it was interesting to hear many of the workers share the same concerns I'd faced years before. If only boundaries training had been available when I started my peer worker role. People talked about the confusion of beginning a peer worker role and being told not to cross boundaries, but not being told what those boundaries were. And one worker stated, I did cross some boundaries initially because I was unsure of what was expected of me. There were many conversations about the emotional toil of always being on guard, what was acceptable, what was not acceptable, and not with the people they were working with, but more so their work colleagues. They talked about the guilt of saying no to people. They talked about the fear of being seen as unprofessional. And they talked about the strength it takes to hold space for others while protecting their own well-being. Strategies was another theme that surfaced through our conversation. For example, I make sure people know that when I am at work, I have my work hat on. This was a very common theme throughout our conversations. What happens when we are required to work with a person we know? How do we separate the personal from the professional? So all the strategies that the living experience workers shared with us are now in the module because we trusted the wisdom in the room. As I've already mentioned, these exchanges we had with this workforce were conversations. We came to them as equals, as we're all in these roles, in these designated roles. However, we did acknowledge the power dynamics and we did all we could to counter that. This was really important because there are hierarchical differences in this space. And so this required respect from us to our peers and an acknowledgement that each person's story was valued, regardless of job role or gender or any differences of opinion, and knowing for us when to step back, when to step in, and how to stay focused and grounded. So even though we are all different and each of us is shaped by our own unique experiences, we are also the same. We recognise that our experiences have brought each of us to a place where we share universal truths, such as fear, hope, shame, love, and these all solidify our mutuality as people with lived living experiences. It was never a one-way extractive process. This project saw everyone freely share information and resources, and we invited everyone involved to consider those resources. This was especially evident during the review process where people were able to suggest changes, modifications, ideas for handouts, etc. And we did our best to include everyone all the way through this. We recognised very early on that we could not, in all good conscience, design this module without collaborating with our peers. Each of us brought our understanding and experiences to the table, and we welcomed the fact that our views may be challenged, and vice versa. We invited critique, and we were in a space that allowed people to say, I don't agree, and wouldn't it be better if we did this? We were willing to shift our own narratives, and I remember times when I would say, wow, I never would have thought of that. And because we didn't have that rigid, structured approach, this module evolved organically, emerging through mutuality, reflection, and ethical clarity. We listened to people who have been excluded and misrepresented. We honoured the messy, non-linear collaboration that followed. And the gold was found in the edges. We knew that this module needed to be designed from the perspectives of the people who would benefit from it. We wanted diversity and all levels of experience and ability, because that's where the gold is found. Not in conventional mainstream co-design, but in authentic, equal relationships. This module shows that when people with lived living experience are involved from the very beginning, the outcomes are more relevant, more grounded, and more impactful. But more than that, it shows that the process itself can be transformative, because when people feel heard, when they feel ownership, when they see their words reflected in the final product, it builds trust, it builds pride, it strengthens relationships. And when it came time to review the drafts, we talked to people. We asked for permission to use their voices. We gave them access to what had been created. And we made changes and improvements based on what they said. This wasn't a linear process. It was iterative, relational, and deeply human. But how did we make sense of the many conversations we had? What you are seeing on the screen is a photo taken at the beginning of March this year, which represents the coming together of people's thoughts and experiences during the consultation process. This was the bare bones of the boundary module, a skeleton that continued to evolve over the following months. Each of these bones became a collection of peers' views, thoughts, suggestions, and experiences. We hung this on a wall where we could refer to it, add to it, and make sense of what we had in front of us. We spent many hours looking at and discussing sections of this document. These words and phrases became lessons, scenarios, statements, and pictures. Each held a story, and each demanded consideration. So I just want to touch on a couple of these. If you look carefully at the small box, bottom left on the screen, you'll see the word taste, and you might be thinking to yourself, what on earth does this word have to do with boundaries? So this word alludes to an AOD peer worker's experience of being offered drugs by a person they were working with. And we knew that this experience needed to sit within this module. And we have dual hearts. You can see this in the box in the top left of the screen. From these two words, almost a whole lesson evolved around how to manage relationships with the people you're working with, when you also have a personal relationship with some of them. But one of my favorite words here is authentic, because this was and always will be the building block of any module that is designed with people who have lived living experience. Modules like this one demand authenticity. However, it has not been all unicorns and rainbows. In the last 8 to 9 months was not without its challenges, and Brett is going to talk to those now.
I guess this stuff isn't easy. It's probably the best way of summing it up, and that it is still relatively new, and there's a range of challenges, and I guess they're still presenting themselves. Let's go through it. How could we find credibility as peers? There's a natural assumption in existing systems often that what do peers bring other than a connection with people they work with? There's got to be a bit of trust that peers could actually put something like this together and make it relevant and make it useful, and also sit within the frameworks that already exist. We know that when we talk about multidisciplinary teams, we know that there's still challenges out there, and particularly across Queensland, as to how do we actually enmesh a peer support workforce into organisations to see the best results for the people that we work with. We kind of got around that one by saying, well, let's just talk to the only peer workers that are out there. And this is what we did. We really feel that we gain credibility by engaging every AOD peer worker we could find from all levels, whether they were directors or managers or coordinators or educators. There was a real issue around scope, and I think that a module like Insight works across the AOD sector as a whole, and here in Queensland we like to see it as a whole, and to try and make a module that had the scope to be relevant to all sectors. We know we've got lots of different workers in different roles across what we do in this sector, whether you're on the front line or you're in maybe you're working on an ODTP program in an outreach capacity. Maybe you're working on a SHMU. Maybe you're working on frontline and an NSP. All of these are different roles and all have their own unique set of challenges around boundaries, particularly when we start working in outreach capacity and you're out in the community. There's all sorts of challenges that can present themselves. So we hope that we got that by just, again, trying to include in our consultation that real scope of workers that exist out there. And similarly, I guess we could also talk about that breadth of the sector. We know this is a diverse sector. We can go from residential rehab facilities through to outreach needle and syringe provision programs. This module needs to cater to everyone. And at times that does present challenges, but what we found overwhelmingly with the peers that we've worked with is that what we're looking for in Queensland is peers that have an understanding of the sector as a whole and have the ability to work across different impacts. And so whether that be making referrals into demand reduction programs or enacting harm reduction strategies with individuals, peer workers should be able to do all of it. And when we get a really well advanced and developed peer set of skills like that, then we can say to ourselves the breadth of the sector becomes less of an issue. We want workers who are capable of providing advice and experience across the whole. Different audiences. We'll talk about that in a minute. I can keep going about that one too. But authenticity, I know Julia's jumped on it as a word, and I do believe that for us to put this in front of peers as they come in, and peers that have had long histories in providing these services, we needed to give it similar to credibility, but we really needed to make it feel like it was done by peers for peers. And then organisational. We talk about the idea that this module has to land with many different audiences. And so not only are we catering to peers, but we're also catering to people who are working alongside peers, other sectors in allied health or in multidisciplinary teams, that we need to make sure that this sits right and people understand what we're talking about when we talk about boundaries. We were really looking forward to releasing this today, and we've done this as peers for peers. But working at Insight, you recognise that there's a massive set of skill sets that exist in the organisation that we can't do without. And whilst we might be able to collate some ideas from some peer workers and think about how we might tackle something, we certainly don't have the background knowledge to get the right photographs or the right videos or to put it together so it is digestible and practical in a sense for an e-learning. We also know that we have to sit in amongst a bigger system, and we know that there's still this concern about risk with peers. And so what we want to make sure is that this module sits right so that everyone's content, which is one of the reasons why we've taken a couple extra days. And unfortunately, the module will not be out today, but I dare say it'll be out before the start of next week. So let's not dwell on the challenges too much, because I think, look, this is the nature of our industry, that we're posed with many challenges, and they're not going to stop. This is a game of baby steps. This is about, I don't think we're expecting revolutionary change overnight, but slowly, as we demonstrate that peers do bring a different perspective and a different approach, and something that needs to be respected and can see better outcomes for all, we just need to keep plugging away. And so this is part of that. I suggested before there's different audiences, and like I said, this creates some challenges. We're AOD peers, and we surround ourselves with AOD peers, and so this was all about that specific audience. But we recognise that non-peers can see this as a valuable learning tool. Everyone's interested. There is a real interest in what does a peer do and what does make it different, and trying to define that, particularly when we talk about role descriptions and we talk about trying to sell this across multidisciplinary teams. We also recognise that what we do here, we wrote it for AOD peers, but at the end of the day, there's many peer support workers out there, regardless of your speciality, whether that be mental health, family and significant others, or wherever peer workers are being employed for their living experience, can raise a set of questions around boundaries. And we're not trying to suggest that ours is perfect, but we've had a good go at it. And I think that anyone who's in a peer support role could probably benefit from having a look at it. In the idea of this collaboration, look, I hate flowcharts. I hate the idea that all of the stuff we do can be summed down into a square peg and a square hole, or a round peg and a round hole. And so this was part of that, where we actually had to think about people's ideas. Julia alluded to before. We really consciously tried to be open to people's suggestions to make this inclusive. And one of the things people wanted were job aids. So accompanying the module is a series of job aids that will assist a worker, particularly, say, if we find ourselves in a situation where our boundaries are being tested or challenged. How can we go about that? How do we then follow up and do this? So we have a peer workers document boundary challenges for later reflection. We've also got a one-sheeter that takes people through a step-by-step process where you can have a think about what are the considerations that are going on here? What sort of decision-making processes can I rely on if I'm feeling like the boundary's being challenged? And we also have a practical guide, trying to simplify and summarise what the module is actually providing. Each of those are available. They're all going to be part of the e-learning, but also available, and I'll demonstrate in a minute, underneath the new AOD Living Experience Toolkit on Insight. So because we can't give you the whole thing today, I think it's really important that we actually give you a bit of a sneak preview and we talk about how we did this and how all of this evolved. And look, this is by no means a comprehensive discussion about how you might maintain boundaries, but we've got some simple steps that we think any peer worker could pick up and follow these to establish what would be, protective and workable boundaries in your role. First thing we talk about is when we meet someone, we just want to explain our role to people. We want to tell them what we do, what we can do and what we can't do. I want to say, listen, I can't help you with the clinical stuff. The clinical people will help you with the clinical stuff because they're really knowledgeable around that and spent years studying it and very much understand it. I'm not anti-clinical. I definitely want to see people moving through to see the supports that can come from that part of our sector. But explaining that to someone can be so important early on because suddenly they realize our relationship is not about the clinical stuff going on. Our relationship is about them. And it is a one-to-one relationship where we're seeking to find out what people's goals are and how we can best assist them but not in a clinical sense. So a little explanation about what you can do and can't do early on is very critical. Moving away from traditional processes, I think peers particularly need to recognise that boundaries aren't just for us. Boundaries are for the people that we work with. And rather than having a boundary conversation when we talk about my boundaries and what makes me feel comfortable and practical in a sense, I think providing opportunity for the people we work with to establish their own boundaries is a really important part of mutuality. That often in other allied health professions, you would see people really needing to go into areas that perhaps people aren't comfortable with, because that's part of their process. We're a peer, we want to provide people with opportunity to say no. So providing opportunity for people accessing your support to define their boundaries, we see as a really critical step that separates us from many other parts of the workforce. We do it specifically. And in the module, we'll talk about the way you can do it and the way you can practice to do that. This is an ongoing conversation around confidentiality, around what those limits might be. We're governed under legislation. We're governed first and foremost by the organisation we work with. Some organisations are going to have different expectations around the information you might provide as a peer support worker, or you might be privy to as a peer support worker. What's really critical in this is us and the organisations having a real clear understanding of what those limits are. And there's all sorts of examples we can run with there, from someone having a cigarette in the gardens and whether that's a reportable offence, through to everything else under the sun. So I think explaining your limits, and particularly early on, about this is what I can and can't do, allows peer workers to maintain that relationship. If we're open and honest and we explain what we can and can't do, and then we also explain, if you start talking about this, that's something I'm going to need to talk to other people in the training team about, then that's something that we can do early on and maintain that relationship. So we've already explained what we do, explained what we don't do, talked about our limits. A seasoned peer worker, many of the ones been around before, would suggest that forecasting issues before they happen is one of those skills that the peer workers need to start thinking about more and more. We can avoid a lot of these situations before they come up, and just enact really easy strategies. And that can be the same as saying, oh, I just found out that you go to the same gym as me. Right, let's have a conversation and revisit boundaries. And so should I see you in the gym, rather than me and you sit down and have a great, deep and meaningful, and you spot me for the next 3 sets on the bar, I think what we can do is we can say, I'll give you a nod and a smile, and maybe we don't have to engage much past that, because it avoids a bit of the confusion about people explaining my relationship with you or your relationship with me. Simple. We've forecast a problem and we've just come up with a strategy that's going to avoid that as it comes up. In conversations, this happens as well. Someone starts to divulge something. You may have explained to someone, if you tell me about you misdiverting some of your medicated supplies, I'm going to have to probably talk to the treating team about that. That might be one of the rules, or an organisational rule that you work under. You've got to be prepared to interrupt. If someone's getting close to that, maybe they've forgotten. Maybe this was 6 months ago you had that first conversation, but certainly having a few quick go-to snappy responses as to how to shut someone down if they're moving towards saying something that might see something result from it as a boundary, then be prepared to interrupt. And not only be prepared, but actually have rehearsed lines. Have little ones that you go to, your catchphrases that you can work on when you know someone is going closer to challenging a boundary. and everything we do. Supervision's a great challenge in our industry. There's been widely written about. I think the more opportunity we have as peer workers to reflect on our decisions, to think about how we might improve as workers, and also to provide that level of security where we're not holding on to information on our own. I think we don't want to set up a system where peers are holding on to this information that can be seen or could be perceived to be providing or provide more concerns for risk. I think we need to reflect. We need to reflect regularly. We talk about all sorts of different ranges of doing that, whether that's the informal conversation you have with your peer in the tea room, or whether that's a supervised professional supervision session with a peer-to-peer. That's a sneak peek. It's the module's going to take about 90 minutes if you jump onto it and go through it one by one. Take your time. You can pause halfway through. You don't need to finish it all in one go. We've got up there a QR code that will link you to what is now an Insight Practice Toolkit. In there, you're going to find all of the work that we've done. So I talked to you earlier about some of the other e-learning modules. I spoke to you about some of the org readiness toolkits and introductory. We've also included some of these webinars that we've participated in. So if anything you want around living experience, you should be able to click on this QR code or go straight to the Insight website, and under toolkits, you'll find that sitting up close to the front. I'd check it on Monday, and hopefully we've got the new e-learning there around boundaries. If it's not there by Monday, I'm sure it'll be there by Wednesday. But I guess that's where we're at. I want 10 minutes for questions. Julia, is there anything you want around questions? Is there any questions come through?
Brett, Julia, thank you very much for not only the presentation, but I guess this very meaningful piece of work and the process. I think, Julia, you said that the end result was the aim of the end result was to make sure that this was relevant and grounded and impactful. And I know we've only given a sneak peek. A few of us here have probably a little bit more of a bigger peek at what's coming, and it does meet all of those. I don't want to say tick the boxes because that sounds like a bad word this morning, but it does meet all those. So well done, and well done for the process of consultation. And I know that consultation is ongoing, and it's they're important things. So we do have a few questions, yes. So I'll go to online first, and then I'll ask anybody in the room who's here with us and pass over the mic. So this is probably a bit more of a higher level question around the process. It's somebody who's actually working on a project that involves AOD and housing, and they're really having difficulty struggling to engage with the experience perspectives, and just would like some of your thoughts or your experience about how to engage people so that there can be this meaningful engagement and not tick boxes. What would be your thoughts?
Oh, this is a difficult one, because ideally they would have already been speaking to people in the sector that are having issues with housing. I guess at this stage, if it were me, and I can only speak from my perspective, I would have been amongst it, and I would be, I don't know, I would be talking to people. I think you've got to be really, really careful, because if you're just wanting their perspective to throw into a paper or to add a bit of oomph, it's really not going to cut the mustard. They've got to question why they're doing the project. I guess they've got to ask themselves if they know people who are struggling with housing. Do they know people who have AOD challenges or concerns? really going to have to start from the ground up, because people may not want to talk to them. Have you got anything to add? It's a really difficult one.
No, but you're right. It's include lived experience from the very start. And if you're struggling to find the lived experience, start engaging with the peaks. We know we've got bodies out there that can provide this representation. If you start there, that's a great point of reference where you can engage with the population. You can ask their opinions, seek their advice before you even construct the research.
Yeah.
There's starting to be a lot more research. There's a lot more stuff written about this engagement now.
Yeah.
But if you're struggling to go where, go to the peaks. If you're struggling about how, just include lived as often as you can and do it authentically.
Yeah.
No, thank you for that. There's a couple of questions here which I might just combine together, because they're questions, and I think you mentioned it, Brett, that there is that kind of wider scope for a lot of the boundaries and that are shared across peer roles outside of AOD designated roles, but in other sectors. So the questions kind of go to that do these strategies and procedures for peer roles and boundaries transfer across other sectors like mental health and disability? And then there's also a question that asks around also peer workers who work inside prisons. So
absolutely.
Yeah, that's.
There's a few sections that we've put in there that really resonate, particularly with an AOD crowd. The idea of someone wanting to share their drugs with you because of the relationship you have, this idea of, do you want a taste, is something that I think would be solely in the AOD space. But when we talk about dual hats and the idea of dual relationships, when we talk about how do we navigate someone buying a cup of coffee or asking for a loan, or do we give them a lift, or do they demand more of our attention than is necessary? All those questions are very relevant across the peer support space.
Yeah. Across the whole sector.
And whether it's in prisons, I still say, if we're going to ask these questions, ask them of the people in those roles. We know we've got some amazing peer support workers in incarceration environments. We know we've got some amazing peer support workers in mental health. If you've got questions around how it might be relevant, I engage those people. That's what this whole process is about, is letting the voices come through of those people who have direct experience of what we're talking about, because that's the way we're going to get more practical solutions. That's the way it's going to be applicable.
Yep, definitely.
Well, thank you for that. I might just go to our room here. Any questions? No? Okay. Well, we've got a few more online here, so they're certainly coming through. Just looking at this, lots of thanks as well. And the questioner before about the engaging for that project says thank you for the response. That was helpful. I'm just looking at this. What role does supervision play in helping AOD lived experience workers maintain healthy boundaries?
Oh, we emphasize supervision if you can get it. If you can get supervision, great. In my previous experience, I wasn't able to access the supervision that I wanted, but I had a very kind and trustworthy social worker that I used to debrief with. I think it's very important. It doesn't matter what peer space you're in. I think it's very important to be able to take questions and concerns to someone who gets where you're coming from. And we emphasize that in the boundaries module.
Okay. And do you feel boundaries sometimes evolve with consumer unique journeys?
I'm happy to jump on that.
Yes.
So I think that's about context. Yeah.
All of this is contextual. We know, if you've been in this role before, you'll know it's only a matter of time before someone walks through your door looking for your services who's going to test your boundaries. You might feel very comfortable that your boundaries are secure and tight until someone walks along and tells you a story that pulls on every heartstring you've got, and you suddenly find yourself in an awkward space. We work with the breadth of society, and I think we're all only human, and that if we're not tested, we know that this module is so important for peer workers, because I would suggest humbly that peer workers face more boundary challenges, and I don't even like saying it, but more boundary challenges than any other workforce due to the nature of our relationship. Someone asked previously about supervision. Look, supervision is not perfect, but what we're talking about nowadays is that you've got a list as a peer worker, as many of those that you engage in, and whether that's informal, whether that's super formalized 1 hour every fortnight with a peer. But sometimes I think we disregard the water cooler conversation. I think we disregard those ones where you might have a really great social worker who understands you. We need to quantify all of the opportunities that we have. And I think we need to be a little bit more formal about how we go about engaging in them. And that's how we make sense of these contextual ones. And when the one does come that's going to test us, you can come and get some outside opinions, so peers aren't sitting with it all on their own.
I'll just add, I think from our conversations with people too, it was very common to hear, I had to work it out. In time, you work it out. And that's the one thing we want for this module to do, is we don't want peer workers being put in risky situations or not knowing what to do, but working it out a year or two down the track. We want them to have that guidance to be able to be onto it straight away. And
I guess in even a more specific question around boundaries, what role does the module address digital boundaries such as social media interactions?
Yes, it does.
Stay tuned.
Yes.
And I guess just picking up on some of the things that you were talking about there, Julia, around that common theme of people needing to work it out. And Brett, you said that there's also that recognition that this needs to sit within frameworks that already exist. Has there or was there much help or kind of tension, I guess, between boundaries being something that's quite well established in other areas or other disciplines within this sort of work? Was that a help? And were there any sort of commonalities or some of the challenges with looking at those sort of existing frameworks?
There's a lot of assumptions that peer workers will just get it right, and that's what happened for most of the start of this sector. We've heard some great theories, from the 3 Fs theory that we won't repeat here, through to other ones where people will just shut down. If you feel your boundaries are threatened, just shut down. No, we're really trying to make this a much more formalized. We don't want people learning by mistakes. Would it have been 90% of people that we spoke to identified where they'd made mistakes with boundaries? And they all wish they hadn't. It all resulted in sleepless nights for people, and maybe not the best service that we could have been providing the people we work with. So we hope that this module just gives new workers a bit of confidence, and existing workers a little bit of a chance to reflect on maybe where they might have gone wrong, or new approaches to move forward.
And I might give you an opportunity here to let our audience know, or just to reinforce, there's a question here about what kind of support can organisations do to support peer workers and embed them better in their organisational, in their organisations and services.
Oh, well, my suggestion would be to go to our Insight website and go and look at the toolkits and have a look at the organisational readiness toolkit.
Yeah.
And have a look at the other ones as well. Even though we've got them for peers, it's good for the organisation. We've got the other one too, the understanding of that AOD living experience workforce. So just have a look at those. That will give you the information you're looking for so that you can embed safely. Yeah.
No, thank you for that. And I think previously the toolkit link had been popped into the chat, and Ben, our multimedia manager, has just popped that back in there. So within that toolkit, you'll see what Julia was referring to, the organizational readiness toolkit, which is written more for organizations,
Yes.
leaders, managers, and other and existing workforces. Look, I think we'll need to end the questions there. There's a couple of a few more there. I just would like to read out some of the recognitions, though, that have come through. Not a question, but I would like to express my thanks to both Brett and my Insight and Lived Living Experience team involved for all of the important work that they do for those of us with lived living experience in the AOD sector. And also a recognition for Julia and Brett and the Insight team for being brave and going first in Queensland in this space. This is a massive topic that we all need to continue to work on and grow and learn together. Thank you, crew. Lots of perspectives and thoughts to continue to harvest. This great work is appreciated. So I think that's a lovely note to end on. And so I'd like to just say thank you. Well, thank you for being part of our team, but also thank you for the work here and for presenting it, and also for the work that will go on.